All right, time to trot out a new segment here. We're going to hit a couple teams, couple games, couple matchups that might have surprised you. Maybe you were all over them. I don't know where you were, but either way, a couple things that we're going to hit. We're going to call it What Happened To. So, Goobs, take it away from the South Bend Airport. What airport are you at?
I'm at the South Bend Airport. My first one is, what happened to my voice, McElroy?
I think you know what happened to your voice, but we won't talk about it. This is a family platform. I think you were screaming at the top of your lungs and probably crowd surfing there on the field. So hopefully you visited the grotto this morning before you headed to the plane, but I would imagine that there was some indulgence on your part throughout the course of the weekend.
It was a very, very fun weekend and, just capped off with a great win. All right, moving on, though, to the segment at hand here. What happened to Illinois? Ranked in the top 25 for the first time since 2011, and they lose at home to Michigan State.
It's pretty eye-opening right now. And the fact that Illinois, they have 2 losses this season. One to arguably, if not the worst team in the Big Ten, but one of in Indiana. And now you lose to Michigan State. The fact that you lose at home is even more alarming. Those 2 teams, however, Indiana and Michigan State, a combined record of 7-11. All right. Pretty wild. I don't know how that happens. And both those teams, both Michigan State and Indiana, scored 23 points in the process. That's a season high as far as points allowed for Illinois. Still a good football team. But now you look at the Big Ten West, y'all. Like, look at the Big Ten West. There are about 5 teams within striking distance with 3 losses that could come out of the Big Ten West and ultimately play in the Big Ten championship game. If there's ever been a season to just totally point to, here's why we don't do divisions. Like, this is it. Like, the Big Ten West is giving me serious ACC Coastal vibes. Like, ACC Coastal, usually they're the one in this situation where, like, the winner of the Coastal's 8-4. The West, I think Illinois is still the class, and they still have a game lead against everybody. But remember, they still have to play Michigan. So guess what? Because of the upset this past weekend, you now have a great scenario for Minnesota. You have a great scenario for Iowa, who's all of a sudden come alive the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure how, but they've come alive the last couple of weeks. I mean, you look at Purdue is still somewhat in the mix. I mean, it's wild when you take into account just how wide open this race becomes, especially if Michigan holds serve and takes care of business against the Illini, who currently sit at the top of the table. So the big reason why they lost this past weekend, 1-6 on 4th down. I mean, that's just not going to happen. They came into the game 10 of 16, and including the performance, if you look at how they played against Minnesota on 4th down specifically, I mean, I think they were 4 for 4 on 4th down that day. Every single one of those 4 conversions led to points and led ultimately to a touchdown. And obviously, anytime you score against Minnesota, you keep the football because it's not an easy thing to do. So it was really 4th down conversions and 4th down stops for Michigan State that was the ultimate disruptor in this one. But a bad loss for Illinois and a bad loss for Brett Bielema.
All right, moving on. What happened to Miami? Lose 45-3 against Florida State at home. They've now lost 4 consecutive home games.
Yeah, Miami's a mash unit right now, man. I mean, I don't really know how else to it's not really a spin. But, man, this team is not deep enough or talented enough to play when they're at less than 100%. I mean, Tyler Van Dyke was lost in the first half of that football game. He's had that hurt throwing shoulder. He threw into the dirt just trying to throw it away, and he grabbed his shoulder, had to leave the game, came back into the game, tried to make a throw a little bit later, landed on it a little bit. He just wasn't anywhere near 100%. They lose Jalen Rivers, their left guard and best offensive lineman, in the process of that game as well. Xavier Restrepo has missed time. They have had, a ton of guys that have missed time with injury. Henry Parrish has missed time. He's at running back. Restrepo's a wide receiver. So if you look at him, they've been a mash unit for the most part from start to finish. I mean, they have had so many guys that have been in and out of the lineup. They were at less than 100% going into the game, and they left the game even less than being less than 100%. Mesidor's been in and out of the lineup. Kinchins has had some injury stuff as well. So I think part of it, look, anytime you are adjusting from one coach to the next, there's going to be a bit of a culture adjustment. All right. Nick Saban, let's not forget, the greatest of all time, went 6-6 in his debut as the Alabama head coach in the regular season back in 2007. That 6-6 team that I was on lost to Louisiana Monroe. So they've already made their loss to Middle Tennessee, right? So Miami is very human, but you can expect they'll be huge in the transfer portal, and we'll try to improve that roster immediately because they need to. Not just in one spot, not just in two spots, but in about 10 spots. They need to be deeper. They need to be more talented. And I think the excitement that surrounded the program coming into the season was totally off the mark.
All right, and last one here. What happened to Oklahoma State? A little over 2.5 weeks ago, they were a top 10 team. In the last 2 weeks, they've lost 2 games by a total score of 85-16.
Well, I think they're a little bit like Miami in the sense that they're just completely beat up. I mean, this team has had to endure significant injuries. I mean, I just can't believe how many injuries Oklahoma State's had to deal with. And it's not a crazy deep roster. I mean, you take away their quarterback, then you're really looking at some issues. But here's the guys that were out. All right. These are the guys. This is a whole list of guys that were out in the game this past weekend against Kansas. And more on Kansas in a minute. We need to give some credit to them, okay, too? So we're going to talk about the Jayhawks. Don't worry. I know all you Jayhawks fans. Like, you've been supportive of the show because we've been supportive of you. Sorry, it's not that hard to be supportive of y'all. Y'all have done a great job. But here are the teams, guys, that you're out. Spencer Sanders, all right, good luck. You lose your starting quarterback, who's a really good player. It's going to be difficult to overcome. Jaden Bray at wide receiver, Braden Johnson at wide receiver, Blaine Green at tight end, Hunter Woodard at offensive line, Thomas Harper at safety. You're a punter. That's how bad it is. Your punter's hurt. All right. So not good, right? It's really, really not been good for Oklahoma State. They've just had one of those unfortunate years where, especially in this time of the year, depth is of the utmost importance. They just haven't had guys been able to kind of replicate the success of the guy that was starting in front of them. So I think a lot like Miami in a sense, not quite to the same extent of disappointing, but a lot to Miami in a sense of, man, it's just too hard to replace those guys without any drop-off whatsoever when you're at a place like Oklahoma State, because there's been a pretty significant drop-off at several different positions.